Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Jacalyn. Take charge of your life personally, financially, and professionally. Visit drjacalyn.com to book an appointment today.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the most listened to radio show on the planet. Even the other stations are tuned in too.
You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn, live at 5 every Friday here on Business Talk Radio. I am your host and executive producer, Dr. Jacalyn Kerbeck, and I am a certified life coach. Our show is all about inspiration and hope, and our guests share their stories of how they overcome adversity. We are very lucky today to have a special guest for a two-part series. We will be interviewing Richard Feldman this evening and also next Friday, August the 28th. With me today is my co-host, Al Cini. Al is the managing partner of BCAT Partners, and they offer a brand and cultural alignment toolkit to promote communication, teamwork, and brand advocacy. Al is also a TV show host of CEO Chat and Morning Coffee on RVN TV. His motto is vision to see, faith to believe, and courage to do. And our guest today is no stranger to any of those. Let us welcome Richard Feldman. Al, Richard Feldman is with us today.
Absolutely great to meet you, Richard.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Richard is the president of the Independent Firearm Owners Association, which is an advocacy organization for gun rights, pro-privacy, and pro-freedom. Richard is the confirmed Facebook page owner with over 250,000 followers. He is an attorney, having graduated from the Vermont Law School, and he is also a government affairs expert and a former Reagan White House appointee. He actually gave Ronald Reagan his first shooting lesson with a customized AR-15. And he worked on a child safety agreement, which led to a Rose Garden announcement with then President Bill Clinton in 1997. He's probably best known for spending 2 decades working for one of the most secretive organizations, the NRA, or the National Rifle Association, exposing politics and greed within the leadership ranks. And now he's a former gun lobbyist. He shares his experience in a phenomenal book that I've read called Ricochet. Extremely well written. You can tell how intelligent you are, Richard. And it's just a phenomenal book that you can get on Amazon. As you've come to know with the Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn show, our show is not about politics and it's not about gun control, but it's about hearing our guests share their story of how they've overcome adversity. And Richard, we thank you so much for being here. You are a veteran. You've been on every major network station. You've been with presidents. You seemingly have done everything. So I appreciate your time, your willingness to spend not just today, but also next week with us.
Yeah, it's great to have you.
Thank you.
So in reading your book, I read that your father, Joseph Feldman, was a child psychiatrist and your mother, Selma, was a social worker. And both of your parents really focused their careers on helping other people and giving back. And that seems to be a far cry from the NRA. So I know that your parents were also gun advocates, but I'm wondering, how did all of that shape you into being the person you are today?
Well, you were naturally looking at the current NRA, and the NRA that I went to work for right after my stint at the White House was back in the early 80s. And it was a very different National Rifle Association at the time. It had not gone to the heights it has gone, and it was much more oriented towards providing services for its membership. It's what made it what it became. I think it's lost its way in many respects. But, when you have a gun or you're dealing with, whether it's a scalpel as a surgeon or a firearm as a police officer, they're tools. the tools of the trade. If you use them effectively and properly, they can be used to save lives. If you misuse them, they can take lives that shouldn't be taken. So it's really not the tool per se, but how that tool is used and for what purpose.
Well, I'm first of all, I think it's a great opportunity talking to you, Richard, because what you just framed for us is the importance of compromise, really, and that is, it is a tool, and it could be used properly. It could also be used improperly. And how do you strike a compromise like that inside of an organization like the NRA? How do you get them to listen to you?
Well, when I was there as the regional political director, they listened to me because they paid me to listen to me and what I was saying. And of course, I was a very junior, just come on board, and I listened to them. But it was a different organization at the time, and we were in a different place in our country. Before the internet, organizations in many ways had more power to make decisions and run with them. A group like NRA is somewhat hamstrung in decision making because they're always thinking ahead of, well, what are my most stalwart supporters going to say? And maybe I can't do this because they're going to complain. And they sometimes overthink them. I let the chips fall where they may and go, try and come up with what's the right decision. Justify how you achieve that decision after you reach the decision, not before. Everybody's not going to agree with you, but I think we're often in this country these days talking past each other. Yeah. We're not really always talking about the same thing at the same time, even though it sounds superficially like we do. And the gun debate is one of the greatest examples of it.
Let me ask you a question the way a lawyer would ask it. And I'm jumping at because I played one on TV. I'm only kidding. Did there come a time, Richard, while you were at the NRA, when being a reasonable man was no longer the way to go?
Not while I worked at the NRA. There were times where it's funny how times change. I was considered a radical when I worked at NRA, or I was very hardcore. I actually haven't changed, I don't think, very much. The society around me has changed. The NRA has changed. I haven't changed that much. I'm about where I was then, but it doesn't matter. You could have a position, but during the Bernie Getz, the subway gunman issue, I remember being told at the time, I wanted to do a news conference in New York City, and my boss told me, well, you can't do that. I go, why not? Well, it's not in the job description. I go, but my job description is passing legislation in Albany. I can't think of a better opportunity than discussing the right of people to use deadly force when confronted with deadly force. I made enough noise, jumped up and down enough that they finally allowed me to go ahead and do it. Meanwhile, they were measuring the curtains in my office, thinking that was the end of me. I'm up against the evil New York media, and they're going to eat me alive. For better or for worse, I'm from New York, so to me, they just felt like the local media. And I also knew at that particular moment in time, 35 years ago or so, that everybody, or almost everybody, was on the side of Bernie Getz. Everyone had ridden a subway car, and you knew you were in the wrong place at the wrong moment, and you wished you had a gun. Or at least you wished there was a police officer on that team, because that's the same thing. There'd be somebody to take care of the situation. And, I spent a little time on the Cambridge police force before going to law school, and I'm sure it's not changed that much. The most common question cops get, not really asked, told, is, well, there's never a cop around when you need one. And I would always say, well, yes, sir, that's true, because if I was around, you wouldn't have needed me. Violent predatory criminals generally don't commit felonies in front of uniformed police officers. They wait till they're gone. So the citizen is on their own. I think that's really why in rural America, one of the reasons, in rural America, the gun issue is better understood. I mean, where I live in New Hampshire, not so much now, but even 20 years ago, the police weren't 24/7. They went to bed at 1 in the morning. So between 1 and maybe 7 a.m., there was no one on duty. They have to get called up, and they had to get dressed, and they had to travel. I mean, it could be a half hour till a policeman showed up, and that would be a good response. Well, if you're in trouble, there's no kind of trouble that really can tolerate a 30-minute response time. The trouble, whatever your problem is, it's long over and gone by then.
Well, for people who might be watching or listening, Bernie Goetz was a very high profile, referred to as the subway vigilante. It happened he was packing that day, and he was being roughed up, and he was in danger for his life, and he used a gun and defended himself. And that became a huge cause, I remember, in the city. And you were there for that.
I was, and I had a news conference in New York. I was rather fortunate the night before my news conference. Ronald Reagan had a news conference at the White House, and he was asked by Sam Donaldson a question about Bernie Goetz. So that put tremendous attention on the news conference that the National Rifle Association, led by me that day, was having in just outside of Times Square at a hotel.
Mm.
Well,
And,
fascinating. I just wanted to mention something to you about your book. I was reading the first chapter about the annual meeting for the NRA, and you had been asked by Robert Glock to go to Atlanta. And when you got there, from what I read, you mentioned your renewed confidence had wavered. And I imagine that not everyone was happy to see you there at the Peabody Hotel. And then from there, you went to meet with Robert. You went to meet Jeb Bush. And there was a woman there, Andra Fisher, I think. And she yelled out, "He's not allowed in here." And I was just, as I read the book, I was trying to imagine what feelings you must have been going through, and how did you propel yourself to continue to go into that meeting?
Well, initially, I was doing some work for Glock, and so I didn't want to cause any situation for the company. And I said, yeah, stay out here. And Robert put his arm around me and said, "You're with us, you're going in." So I went in, and she was somewhat frustrated or a little turned around. And yeah, some people were very gracious and, spoke to me. I mean, these were people I knew for many years, and most of them one-on-one were always gracious and would speak to me. They were frightened to be seen in front of their peers speaking and being friendly to me.
Mm.
There wasn't really the personal animus. It was that the big, tough NRA senior leadership was scared to be seen talking to me.
Right.
They're kind of like bullies. And when you smack bullies in the face, you get their attention, and they go, "Oh, I'm sorry. Was my fist in your way?" "Yeah, it was, bud. Move over." And they calm down. I don't find them so tough, really.
Yeah, there's no bigger bully than the NRA. I mean, and that's a big organization with a lot of juice, and to find the courage to kind of walk in there.
But it's not the membership that I generally have disagreements with. It was the leadership. Again, it wasn't over the policy. After all, NRA is very happy, talks about child safety locks as though they invented the idea. But the fact that I was ahead of the curve, and they hadn't blessed the fact that I was meeting with Bill Clinton and making the announcement on behalf of the firearm industry, who at that time I worked for, they didn't like that. There's a new sheriff in town. Well, they better get used to it, because I think their day in the sun may be a little shady these days.
And you're still here standing, and we're happy for that. So we need to go to commercial and hear from some of my friends. I'm so excited to see their commercials. So stay tuned here on Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn, live from Business Talk Radio, and simultaneously streaming on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. We'll be right back.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the most listened to radio show on the planet. Even the other stations are tuned in too.
You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Hey everybody, my name is Ralph Graves Jr. I'm the host of the Ralph Graves Jr. Show, and I want to invite you to pick up my book, Unstoppable. I wrote a book called Unstoppable. It's 7 universal laws that will transform how you pursue and achieve success. The one thing that my 20 years of law enforcement has taught me is that no matter who you are, we are all governed by universal laws, like gravity. But in this book, we're going to talk about laws like the law of forgiveness, laws like the law of control, the law of intelligent practice, the law of expectancy. I was able to see how those, no matter what their background was, those who identified and treated these laws with respect, they were able to go on and lead successful lives. So pick up this book, and you can go ahead and pick it up at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, RalphGravesJr.com, where anywhere where fine books are sold. Thank you.
Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Jacalyn. Take charge of your life personally, financially, and professionally. Visit drjacalyn.com to book an appointment today.
There are 7.7 billion people on Earth today. 40% of these people are under the age of 25. Young adults are the most fertile mission field in the world today. In Scripture, we see Jesus pouring his life into 12 young adults who he equipped to change the world and all of history. Like Jesus, we believe that the best approach to reach the world with the gospel is to invest in young, emerging leaders and equip them to build disciple-making movements. Concentric is the notion of surrounding and sharing a common center. Our center is the model and strategy of Jesus for both leadership development and ministry formation. As a global alliance, we provide equipping in biblical leadership based on Jesus' example in the New Testament. Jesus modeled for us how to make disciples that reproduce. Focusing on leadership development is key to creating movements that spread the gospel and Jesus' disciple-making strategy to young leaders around the globe. Our ministry alliance partners are actively equipping leaders and building movements of multiplication that reproduce the life of Christ. Join us today to equip young leaders with Jesus' strategy that will change cities and nations.
The session that we had with BCAT was really entertaining and enlightening. We were able to put together some very specific steps that we as individuals can take, and it was really fun to all come together and see sort of where we're going as a team and how we can all get there together.
We had a tremendous experience with the BCAT partners. One of the challenges that we have as an organization is to make sure that we have the right people in the right chairs doing the right thing. To do that well, you have to have synergy. You can try to dream up ways to make sure that your group does that, or you can rely on experts. We would recommend BCAT partners to anybody who's looking to take their organization to the next level.
Academy Sedan and Limo is a full-service transportation company serving the Philadelphia metropolitan area with full knowledge of the New York City, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. areas. We pride ourselves on being the most dependable, conscientious company in the industry. Our always on-time service and dependable pricing make us the company to call for any event or occasion. Our vehicles can accommodate any size party for any occasion. Our vehicles range from four-door sedans to SUVs to minivans to limo buses to full-size tour buses and can accommodate groups of 2 to 100. We offer airport shuttle service or over-the-road service without limitation regarding mileage or time, and no drive is too long or too far. So if you find yourself in need of transportation of any type with any vehicle, give us a call at 610-842-4564 and let us show you what a real transportation company can do for you.
Use code ACADEMY2020 to receive 20% off your first 3 rides, including parking and tolls.
Make a bold statement by wearing a custom jewelry design from Margie Cedrone, Artisan Jeweler, located at 121 Haddon Avenue in Westmont, New Jersey. Telephone number 215-384-7155. Margie Cedrone is an artisan jeweler who's been a permanent fixture on the renowned Jewelers Row in Center City, Philadelphia since 1988, starting her business in 1982. All of Margie's designs are individually handmade as well as custom design. She's one of the only jewelers left in the area who still crafts the finest tailor-made diamond jewelry, whether it's a statement piece or an everyday item. In addition to her one-of-a-kind designs, she specializes in pearl stringing and bead jewelry repairs. Margie Cedrone Jewelry pairs nearly 30 years of experience with the building of lifelong client relationships. Dr. Jacalyn has been a client and friend of Margie Cedrone for many, many years. Each week during my show, Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn, live on Business Talk Radio, I will be featuring one of the beautiful pieces of jewelry that Margie custom made for me. I urge you to contact Margie through her website, margiecedronejewelry.com. Wait no longer to make your own bold statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the most listened to radio show on the planet. Even the other stations are tuned in too.
You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.
Well, hello there. We're back on Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn, live at 5 on Business Talk Radio and live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. With me today is Cini, my co-host. I'm glad you stayed around through the breakout. And our special guest, Richard Feldman. Richard is the author of Ricochet, Confessions of a Former Gun Lobbyist. Richard, your book, as I mentioned, is outstanding. You're extremely intelligent. The way you write is just, I'm reading, I'm thinking, this guy is a genius. So I highly recommend picking up a copy of Ricochet on Amazon. In your book, you talked about a time when you were at camp, and I hope I say this right, Mackinac, and how it left you with a mental connection between guns and politics. What did you mean by that?
As a youngster, it wasn't really very political back in the 60s, the whole gun issue. And I just learned how to shoot in .22 long rifle, and lots of camps, most camps taught riflery and archery back then. And I guess I was getting interested in politics. And I remember that summer watching on TV at the rec hall, the Democratic convention and Republican convention that nominated Goldwater and LBJ. And maybe there was some connection between the politics of learning how to shoot a gun at that time. Certainly in later years, there would be tremendous connections between politics and guns.
What came up for you while you were writing that book? So you had all these experiences and you're no stranger to controversy, and then you're putting pen to paper, and I'm wondering what thoughts, what feelings are coming up for you as you're actually putting it down on paper.
Well, what I wanted people to understand was how an organization like the National Rifle Association operated. You know, you can have your chart, how laws are made, but then there's the real world of how decisions are made, and how people influence, and it changes over time. It's changed dramatically over the last 30, 40 years, the power curves. There isn't just a single National Rifle Association. There are many NRAs. There's the senior paid leadership in Washington. There are the consultants. There's the board of directors. Every state has its own rifle and pistol association and many firearm groups. So there's a very diffused membership on the internet. You just, wherever state you live in, just list that state and gun rights organization. You'll come up with 2 to 10. So there's an awful lot that goes into the politics and the activism. I think we make a tremendous mistake in this country. focusing our attention on the gun as though that is the be all and end all. To me, the gun is never the problem per se. The problem is always in whose hands are the guns. If the gun was a problem, then why would we issue them to law enforcement? How would that? We don't issue them packs of cigarettes or cigars, but we do issue them sidearms because they're very effective tools when necessary to be used. They're just as effective in the hands of the civilian as they are in a police officer. And when used properly, they can protect your life. And when used improperly, they can take a life.
So there you go. There you go. There you go again, Richard, being a reasonable guy. And so how do you handle a conversation with somebody who's just very heated and very upset and believes that what we ought to do is take everybody's guns away?
Well, I'd probably say, we still live in a free country. You're certainly, you want to ban all guns? Okay. That's actually almost an easier position for me to handle than someone who says, oh, I believe in the Second Amendment. I just want to limit you having this gun that I don't like or that gun I don't like. But it's actually harder when you start drawing lines that have no real meaning. They sound like they're meaningful, but I don't believe they're terribly meaningful at all. One of the examples, of course, people talk about assault weapons, and I've always said, and actually I've spoken with some victims and their family members who we have to ban these guns, and I've said, I really like to ask you a question, if I may, off camera. And sure, I go, would the death of your loved one have been eased in some small way had they been shot and killed with a 30-06 instead of a 223? Would that have eased your pain just even a little bit? To which their answer is, well, of course not. So then I'm confused. If you say you want to ban all guns, I understand that, and that's a different discussion than saying, well, I want to ban the guns I don't like. Well, which guns don't you like? The guns that were used against me. Well, I'm all for banning guns that are going to be used against me too. But you can't know that in advance. And it takes our focus away from the problem, which is the person, and focuses it on this, I think, somewhat irrelevant or less than relevant discussion about the particular type of gun that was used in a particular instance, as though that was material to that issue. Any other gun could have done the same thing. Guns are all capable of one thing: firing projectiles at high speed downrange. The gun doesn't determine what it's pointed at, the individual does.
Absolutely.
So that guns don't kill people, people kill people, which everybody makes fun of.
Yeah, I would take it a little differently. I'd say guns certainly don't generally kill people. It's bullets. It's the ammunition that kills the people.
It's the ammunition that kills. What about control?
Your delivery device.
You raise an interesting point. What about controls on ammunition? Because that's something else that people have said we could maybe do to reduce gun violence.
Well, I'm not. People say that, and then I usually will ask them, do you have any idea how many bullets are sold and expended annually in this country, not by the military and the police, by civilians? And they go, well, a couple 100 million, maybe 1 billion. And the answer is about 15 billion rounds are fired every year in this country. This summer, boy, I've been hearing them in my neighborhood all the time. Without things to do, people have been out in their backyard. I do live in rural America, so they shoot in your backyard in some cases. But again, you can reload ammunition. So what is it that we're trying to do? Ammunition isn't very difficult to load, and these days you could actually build a gun with a 3D printer online. So, we have to do things that make sense and not just political sense. I, perhaps better than most, understand bumper stickers. They have their utility. in politics. They're making a statement. But if we want to achieve some movement that makes sense and actually does something, forget about making sense, it's actually effective, well, then we have to align the policy and the politics so that one doesn't prevent the other from occurring and moving forward.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I think it's a great point too. I'm wondering, we have a question from someone on Facebook. And the question is from a Facebook user: how is it not meaningful to ban assault weapons? And thank you for that question. I appreciate it. I want to make sure we stay on point with overcoming adversity and being in alignment with that. I don't know, Richard, would you like to answer that question?
Sure. I suspect whenever anyone answers the question, what they're really asking is a little different. They're talking about a machine gun, a fully automatic, which is correct if that's what they mean. That is what an assault weapon is. It's a gun that you did press the trigger and it keeps firing until all the ammunition is spent. In fact, the debate we're having in this country has nothing to do with true assault weapons. It has to do with semi-automatic firearms. When you pull the trigger, one round is fired. You pull the trigger again, another round is fired. Again, it's not about the gun. I could make the argument, and lots of SWAT team members I know and have trained with have always said they'd rather be up against someone with a machine gun than a semi-auto. You depress the trigger, they're going to be out of ammunition in a few seconds. They can walk over with their flashlight and smack them on the head. But if they have a semi-automatic with the same 20 or 30 rounds, they could keep a squad pinned down for 2 days. So again, it's so situational. An assault weapon isn't a more dangerous or a more powerful gun. In fact, in some ways, it's quite the opposite. Whenever an AR-15 is used, I always hear the media talking about this powerful round. Well, it's a .223. It's not a powerful round at all. It's not a deer rifle. Many states don't even allow you to use a .223 caliber to shoot deer. It's too underpowered. But when you're talking about humans, what difference does it make? Whether you're shot with a 45 or a 22. I don't want to be shot. That's the point we should be addressing. Not, well, it's okay to shoot me with this caliber. I don't want to be shot, but better to be shot with this caliber than that caliber. How is that a debate that we should even be tolerating? So the particular type of gun doesn't matter. It just is an irrelevancy in the situation. It has more to do with the site of the shooter. That's how much ammunition do they have. I mean, there's so many variables in it. And instead of dealing with the problem, we have this discussion that we've just spent the last moment or so talking about, which is about the politics of the issue.
Yeah.
Assault weapons are a political talking point. They're not a policy.
And that gets us really to Dr. Jacalyn's question, which is how do you find the courage often to I guess, argue against a strongly held political position that really has no basis in logic, kind of like the arguments you would have at the NRA in your later years while you were there.
Well, I think this is true for all discussions. When you really can't challenge what people believe, because that's threatening to people. Instead, what I've always tried to do, I'm sure not always successfully, is to understand the underlying basis for their beliefs. Because if you knock them out, again, if you think that an assault weapon, because we call it such, is more dangerous, I don't really want to debate about this. So why do you think what makes it an assault weapon an assault weapon? If I understand their belief, I can change the outcome of the discussion by kicking out the underpinnings, saying, well, it really isn't what you say. And isn't the problem, do you really care if somebody has a single shot, a bolt action .223 pointed between your eyes, or a fully automatic? You're going to be just as dead. Is it a real?
It's going to be a bad day either way.
Right.
Yeah. I'm concerned about the person having the gun.
Absolutely. I'm wondering, we're actually coming to the end of our interview, believe it or not, but I'm wondering, with everything that you've gone through, and we're talking about issues that are very serious, right? And people get very heated on one side or another, but you have to constantly go out and as a public person, as a known person, and answer questions and just speak to how it is that you feel, what you believe, what your organization represents. My question is, can you share with us, what are some of the things that you do when you're getting ready to go out to a meeting or to give an interview, that you mentally and physically prepare yourself to move forward?
Well, after you've done it a long time, it really does become second nature. It's always trying to understand, kind of like sales. It's understanding where the other person's coming from. Because if you can put yourself in their shoes, what they're saying may not be so stupid after all. They just have a different perspective of the issue than you. But if you can understand where they're coming from, their perspective, you can address their perspective, and all of a sudden you're not as much of a threat to them. And sometimes you can draw together and say, look, we're actually on the same side here. We may think we're on different places, and maybe we're coming at it very differently, but what we want to achieve is actually the same thing. So instead of having an argument, I'd be lying if I said I didn't always enjoy arguing. Sometimes it's fun, especially in front of a crowd. When you focus on someone, you're using that individual as an instructor for everyone in the audience. They may not love me, but everyone else may understand it better by my focus on them. But if it's on a one-to-one, I really want to understand what it is they're trying to say. And much more often than not, what they're trying to say, it's our language, the semantics of this debate separate us. They prevent us from having that discussion about the problem, and we're talking about the rhetoric around the problem, not the problem.
You're at least as much a teacher as you are a lobbyist, Richard.
I think my best lobbying was always when I took legislative aides out annually. We used to do a shoot in Fairfax, Virginia, and I'd have 75, 100 legislative aides out there, both sides of the aisle, from offices where they thought guns were wonderful to offices where this is a rare opportunity to see all those crazies. And they get it in the hand, and after they were firing the gun, they got it. They understood. The guns all felt pretty much the same. There wasn't this big distinction. You pick up the so-called assault weapon. It's no different than any other gun. It just looks different, fires the same. It does the same amount or less damage than other guns. There are so many other relevant issues. So you're right. It was the educational experience that was the best lobbying I ever did on the issue.
How do you spend your time now?
Today I've spent my time at the beach and in a kayak.
So there's the relaxed Richard side also.
Hopefully that's always fun. But my little group, the Independent Firearm Owners Association, I think we're going to be revisiting that in the next week or so. And given what's going on in this country, I want to re-enter the fray and participate again. I think this issue is going to be a front and center issue in next year's congressional sessions. So I expect to be back in Washington and testifying on legislation and working with both sides of the aisle.
It's great.
That is great. So you're back in the mix again. Good for you. So hopefully you'll get enough time enjoying the kayak and the elements in the outdoors to prepare for that. So
I'm more afraid of a kayak than I am a gun. If I might have to tell you that.
We're actually at the end of our program, gentlemen. And of course, we're coming back next week. Richard, I'm so excited to see you again next week. And Al also. Any final words that you have that you want to leave our listeners and viewers with? Richard?
Well, yeah, sure. I think in this country, on all our issues, we're really a very centrist country. Although sometimes you'd never know it watching television. We're all kind of much more moderate, and we're not as far apart as a lot of the talking heads on TV would like everyone to think we are. We may have different views in terms of certainly the presidential election, but when it comes to what we want as Americans, we're not nearly as far apart. And if we could succeed in doing a better job of articulating what we'd like to accomplish and leave the polemics out, I think on many issues, we'd find the old America coming back and finding ways to achieve solutions to problems instead of constantly debating them in and of themselves.
Great advice.
That's very uplifting. That's a great way to end our program. Mr. Cini, anything from you?
No, I'm just looking forward to continuing the conversation. I definitely want to talk about the news media and how they make this more complicated for you. So that'll be something we can talk about next week. It'll be fun.
Absolutely. I have a whole list of questions. So
great.
So that's our program for this evening. Thank you for tuning in to Rapping with Dr. Jacalyn live at 5 on Business Talk Radio. Please go and pick up Richard Feldman's book, Ricochet, Confessions of a Former Gun Lobbyist. It can be purchased on Amazon. I have the book. Al has the book. My mother just read the book. It is exceptional, extremely well written, a very candid insight into what Richard's experiences were. And I'll be looking forward to hearing feedback about Ricochet. Please message me. I want to know that you're out there reading it. And maybe you'll read it by the time we have Richard on next week, and you'll have some great questions for us. So thank you again, gentlemen. Thanks to our producers. Thank you to my friends who have sponsored us. And we will see you next week. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Dr. Jacalyn.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Jacalyn. Take charge of your life personally, financially, and professionally. Visit drjacalyn.com to book an appointment today.
Ladies and gentlemen, here it is, the most listened to radio show on the planet. Even the other stations are tuned in too.
You're listening to Business Talk Radio, where we take business to the next level.